Landslides, hurricanes, and creeping faults. Welcome to the GSOC Geology Hour, our monthly gathering of geology enthusiasts brought to you by the Geological Society of Oregon Country with support from the Beverly Vogt Portland State University Scholarship Fund and the PSU Department of Geology. So, Obinna, welcome. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me on the show today. Hi, everyone. My name is Obinna. I'm in my fourth year PhD student at Portland State University. I wanted to use this opportunity also to say thank you to the GSOC Society members and then the Beverly Vogt Grant for contributing to my research so far. And then I will be giving a brief of what I have done and how far I've come on my research. I'll be talking on landslide dynamics in the Puget Lowland, trying to establish if there are any links between landslide distribution and the timing of some crustal faults in the area. But before I start, I would like to talk about the motivation for this. Earthquakes, especially large magnitude earthquakes, have been known to trigger a lot of landslides. And these landslides, which is a secondary earthquake hazard, can impede efforts by emergency response teams to reach people that may have been trapped or cut off during high magnitude earthquakes. So it is very important to understand the dynamics between landslide triggering and earthquakes, especially in a place like the Puget Lowland, where we know that we've had crustal high magnitude earthquakes that have occurred in the past. Just for context, here is a table I've just presented to show the number of earthquakes that have been triggered by some number of landslides that have been triggered by some earthquakes in the past 20 years. Just randomly selected some of them just to see why this research is very important. Now, let's talk about the study area. The Puget Lowland is situated in a very seismically active part of the Pacific Northwest. There is an array of crustal faults, as shown in the map. We have the Seattle fault zone, the Tacoma fault zone, all crisscrossing the study area. And then about 1,000 years ago, it has been precisely dated that the Seattle fault zone ruptured, triggering about a magnitude 7.0 earthquakes. We also know that the Tacoma fault zone also gave off between 1290 to 1080 calibrated years before present. So, and we know that this area is also very prone to landslides, like that is just landslides spread all over the landscape. But the question remains, where are the ones triggered by earthquake? Now, this is a very interesting study to dive in, because we know that there are background landslide rates that are triggered by rainfall and other causes. So we try to hypothesize that the earthquake-triggered landslides should cluster around, first of all, temporally, around regions or time in the past where there was serious seismic shaking. And then the second hypothesis is that the seismic landslides will cluster in regions with big ground velocity. So we'll go ahead and test this hypothesis as the study goes on. But first of all, let's talk about earthquake timing and landslide age. To be able to establish any relationship between earthquakes and landslides, we need to know the timing of the earthquake and the age of the landslide. Luckily for us, the recent paper by Black et al. 2023 have used tree rings to precisely date the rupture of the Seattle fault zone to about 1027 calibrated before present. We also know that the Tacoma fault zone erupted between 1290 and 1080, as I earlier stated, owing to the works of Nelson et al. So the challenge now is to establish the ages of landslides in the area. So this can be done individually via an array of methods. We can use dendrochronology, if we have landslide dam lake and we have preserved tree stumps, we can count the rings in the trees to tell us when this tree died, which will tell us when the landslide happened. We could use radiocarbon from select landslides. We could use, I don't know, cosmogenic radionuclide and a bunch of other dating techniques. But the issue is, the challenge is that for this kind of study, we need a regional dating. We need to date landslide in an entire area to be able to see if we can tell if there are clusters in their age that could coincide with the timing of the earthquakes. So to do this, we employed landslide surface roughness, which is a metrics pioneered by Adam Booth and Lahousen et al. That tries to equate the roughness or smoothness of landslides to their age. So this is based off the soil diffusion principle, which pretty much states that, or explains that rough landslide surfaces would smoothen over long periods of time as both runoff, rain, and other processes just move around the edges, rounding off the edges of the sharp scarps and everything and making it smoother with time. So what we are looking at here is a LiDAR image of the Oso landslide just after it has happened, and then an adjacent landslide that is about 5,000 years old. Now, if you look, this is the landslide I'm referring to from Oso 2014, and this is a second landslide adjacent to it. Now, these two landslides, also we know when it happened, pretty recent, and this other one is about 5,000 years before present. And then if you look at the surface of the two landslides, there is a distinct difference in how rough or how smooth both of them are. So this has been used or proven to be used to infer ages to landslides on regional scales. But to carry out surface roughness, first of all, you need to map the landslides. So in this study, we made use of, made reference to the Washington Geologic Survey inventory and mapped over 2,000 landslides. But to calculate their roughness, it is important to exclude areas that may have been impacted by anthropogenic activity or reactivation or any other thing that could contribute to roughness that would not reflect the actual age of the landslide. So this is the walkthrough for the roughness. First of all, you map the landslide, then you map up and erase all features that may not reflect, might not be reflective of soil diffusion, and then you calculate the roughness. In this particular method calculation, we use the continuous wavelength transform, which pretty much scales roughness based on matching what we call the Mexican heart on the topography to tell whether it is very rough or very smooth. And then at the end of the day, you take a mean roughness value for individual landslides. For landslide mapping and radiocarbon dating, after mapping our landslides and calculating their roughnesses, we selected a few landslides and ground truthted them in the field, partly to confirm what we have mapped and also to see if we can collect radiocarbon materials for dating. And this will be very, very important because the radiocarbon dates from the landslide matched with the roughness dates is then used to create what we call a age-roughness model, which we can use to ascribe age to many other landslides that we are not able to date using radiocarbon. So in the field, ideally, if you're looking for landslides, looking for logs or radiocarbon materials to date in the field, you'll be looking out for logs of trees or dead trees that were killed and buried in the landslide. In the image, I have is actually just showing the LiDAR along Marshall River, where I traversed looking for landslides. And then we have the circles, dash circles in red are just showing the logs that we are sticking out. And then the D is just showing where I was sampling the logs. So these log samples we are collected and sent out for radiocarbon dating, and then the result we are then presented and used to calibrate this radiocarbon age dating curve. So what we did is we got our radiocarbon age, and then we have our roughnesses for those key landslides. And then matching the radiocarbon and the roughness, we're able to create this age roughness model that shows an exponential relationship between age, landslide age, and landslide roughness, which must saying that as landslides get older, their roughness smoothens. You have rough landslides tell us that the landslide is pretty young, while older ones are very, very smooth. So we combine this data. We've gotten 5 new radiocarbon ages from the study, and then combine this with dates already obtained from the works of Lahusen et al. 2016, Booth et al. And then the precisely dated Hammer landslide that dammed the lake, which was used to ascribe the precise date for the rupture of the Seattle Fault earthquake. We calculated the roughness for that landslide as well and included all this to generate our age roughness model for the Puget Lowland, which is shown here. Now, from this, we got our feet, the equation of feet of the model, which we use to now infer the ages of more than 2,000 landslides in the area and then look at their distribution. So here, I'm just showing the landslide age histogram. First of all, the first thing that jumps out of this chart is that we have a skewed data where we have over-representation of landslide data in recent times. And then this is a problem that has been bugging the landslide community on how to best represent landslide data because of preservation bias. So a whole lot more landslides are preserved in the landscape, and a whole lot more new landslides are preserved in the landscape as opposed to older ones. So in looking at landslide data, you have this pattern all over the world. So what we're trying to do here is to zoom in to between 200 and 4,000 years, pretty much removing or filtering out all the at least 200 years of recent landslide events to see if there could be any discernible patterns in the distribution or frequency of landslides over time that we could link to our periods of seismicity in the study area. What we have come up to, or what we've decided to do recently, is to pretty much look at the distribution of the roughness data itself without the age. Because here, what we see is that from the roughness distribution, there isn't a lot of influence in the way the data is displayed that is posed by preservation bias. So we are looking at the raw roughness data from the landslides, and then pretty much being able to tell which areas do we have clusters of landslides or not. So I have overlaid here the timing of the Seattle Fault rupture and the Tacoma Fault rupture on our landslide roughness distribution. And then these are shown in pink and orange. So what we see is that, broadly speaking, there is a broad peak of landslide that pretty much overlaps the ages of these earthquakes. So that was kind of what we're hoping to see. And then, yeah, eventually we'll try to analyze and see if these landslides are actually, at least partially, clustering close to the fault or close to places that have been modeled with high seismicity. So going forward, what we did is we filtered out the entire landslide data set and zoomed into landslide whose age corresponds to these periods of seismicity, and then map them back into the landscape to see what they look like. So this chart is a little small. I don't know if you can see it, but here what we see is the distribution, the spatial distribution of the select landslides that ages overlap these periods of seismicity. So we further try to see their distribution with relation to the fault, with relation to to peak ground velocity, that I'll show in the next slide. But visually looking at what we have, there seems to be no apparent patterns. So next, we try to overlay the data on the most recent peak ground velocity model for the Seattle fault. And then what we have shown in the map here is that we have landslides occurring in places just a little bit outside the most intense model area for peak ground velocity. How did we arrive at this? So first of all, I divided the peak ground velocity model into 5 classes, showing different ranges of movements. So we have here to the left in the table, we have a peak ground velocity class in centimeter per second. And then we have the fastest areas, the most intense moving areas is pretty much at closest to the fault, where we have the green, the light green and the dark green regions. But then we also classify this, our landslides, to see the spatial distribution of the area of landslide in each of the peak ground velocity classes, to see which of them correlates more with landslide presence or no landslide presence. So looking at it, the frequency ratio here shows us that we have landslides occurring at intervals between 38 to 53 centimeters per second. More landslides are happened in this region compared to places we expected them to happen, which is areas with high peak ground acceleration, peak ground velocity. So this was counterintuitive to what we had expected, and we are still curious as to why this is happening. So far, our key takeaway is that landslide roughness cluster coincides with timing of the Crustal fault earthquakes. But the results suggest that intensity of peak ground velocity alone do not explain the spatial distribution of the identified seismic landslides. Other factors that we are thinking might be at play here is topography and local topography and amplification. That is amplification of seismic shaking may play an important role as well. I would be quick to mention some of the limitations that could have affected our results. And first of all, age dating uncertainties is something that has been plaguing this kind of study over years. We have that radiocarbon ages are very variable in the atmosphere. So sometimes when you have an age and you're trying to calibrate it over a radiocarbon curve, you can get a range of ages. And this is the age we use to ascribe, we use to impute in our roughness model. So this uncertainty is directly transmitted to this roughness model. So our landslide roughness is as well comes with a lot of limitations. We have landslides that could be very complex, that have reactivation. We have anthropogenic impacts on slopes or on landslide surfaces that can introduce artificial roughnesses. So these all play a role and might just affect the actual roughness we are using to run our analysis. So the landslide preservation bias is another limitation that we have, or challenge that we have, where most of the landslides that probably were triggered 1,000 years ago are no longer in the landscape. It's either they've been eroded away or imprinted over by newer landslides. So going forward, we are looking at employing a descriptive, or rather a method by Baron et al. This is a recent paper that just came out that was able to distinguish between co-seismic landslides and rainfall triggered landslide, because that is another complexity in our study, where even though we are able to isolate some of landslides that we believe were triggered within the time period, not all of them were actually ecoseismic, as we know their background landslide rates. So we are looking to use that to discriminate between what we have as mapped as currently ecoseismic and what could be rainfall triggered in them. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Obinna. That was absolutely wonderful. And there are a couple questions for you.
Yeah, I was just curious how you were, like, what things you were looking at to calculate the roundness of the landslides or the roughness of the landslides.
Okay. So I think I blew over that. So for roughness, we calculated the continuous wavelet transform. That is the method we use. But what we are looking at is how the slope and curvature of the landslide changes, right? As you move from one part of the landslide to the other. So it's like we did this over different scales. The continuous wavelet is like, it's a signal processing method where you can match the signal. It's like, imagine a Mexican hat. It's called a Mexican hat. And you place it on different portions of the landscape and see how well it fits the particular feature. If you're looking at a very wide area or a feature that has a whole lot of minute topography, you shrink the hat and place it around to just see how it fits the mount or the hollows around. And then with that, you can get a sense of how rough or how smooth the surface is.
Next question. Did the underlying lithology vary across your study area? Because this is another big variable that I've observed here in the Ozioko Mountains.
That is a very good question. We do know that varying lithology types, landslide types, and all that could affect the rate at which soil diffusion and invariably the roughness proceeds with time. So for this study, we limited our analysis on the Puget Lowland on only glacial sediments. Yes, so we did not. We try to control for that. We're just limiting the analysis on landslides on glacial sediment alone.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense.
How will these data be a tool for you to apply this knowledge, the frequency and the clustering and so on, for other studies that you might be conducting? So if I was thinking possibly, if there are a lot of landslides peaking, it's because something in the climate is urging that on. Or maybe some of the underground water or something is causing that increase in frequency. How will you use these studies for other studies?
Oh, okay. If I understand what the question is, you're saying that if we are seeing this kind of pattern here, how can is it possible to apply this in other related studies? For instance, we are looking at a warming climate. There could be more frequency of storms and stuff like that. So could we use this, for instance, in looking at, I don't know, the frequency of floods in the past 1,000 years by just, I don't know, something similar. But yes, I think time series analysis like this, where we look at how frequent an event has happened over time, is what is being readily applied to a series of studies, especially with reference to climate. However, when you are looking back in time, as we are in this study, it becomes a little bit difficult because, it's one thing to work with data that was just generated, assuming like most of our landslides were from a recent earthquake. You would have your data, but going back in time brings an extra complexity to it. But yes, the answer is yes. Studies like this are being used in different spheres of science to make inferences on what's happening there. Yeah.
So is anyone training an AI to calculate and aggregate landslide roughness in a more comprehensive graphic database of all landslides? Oh, I wish this were happening, but Obinna, do you know if somebody's thinking about this?
I'm not sure. It's possible someone is doing that already or thinking about it, but I do not know of any as of now.
Okay,
But
you potential
that's very
graduate
interesting.
students out there, hey, have we got a deal for you? Alyssa, are you ready to take us on into geology news in a nutshell?
So yeah, this is my segment, Geology in a Nutshell, as I've been calling it. And recently I've been focusing on covering some select recent scientific articles. But today we're going to do things just ever so slightly different, just for a portion of it. So today we're going to start with looking at Hurricane Helene as a geologic event. This was a request. We're going to have some more landslides in here. I'm going to do my best, Obinna. And then we're going to look at some creeping faults and fault geometry. So the first segment here, looking at Hurricane Helene as a geologic event, this is something that I've compiled from a few different sources at the U.S. Geological Survey's different landslide information. So unless noted otherwise, most of the information is going to come from a combination of sources from the same place, which doesn't make sense, but it does. So Hurricane Helene was a hurricane that happened just in September of this year. It was classified as a Category 4 storm when it hit land on September 26th. And the storm originally made landfall in the Florida Gulf, but the most severe impacts from the storm were actually significantly farther inland. So southern Appalachia was hit with widespread severe flooding, which is going to cost billions of dollars to restore infrastructure in that area. And more importantly, this event was responsible for hundreds of casualties. So it's a really devastating thing. And so we want to have some sensitivity in kind of thinking about this, even though, as geologists, we're like, okay, well, look at these things our Earth can do. Just remembering that, we are people studying this event too. So this event was associated with record rainfall throughout parts of Appalachia. There were strong winds associated with the hurricane that were strong enough to take out power lines throughout the region. And then waters from these flood events were strong enough to carry away entire homes. And there's videos you can see of this happening that we were watching it in real time. And so the response in the area has been, in the geological side, started at the state level. And so the North Carolina and Tennessee Geological Surveys have been requesting emergency funds to get things studied out in this area. And so this has been a collaborative event where geologists from the USGS, they have the landslide event team, came out to assist state geologists. And so this has been an interagency collaboration that has allowed for the sharing of resources as well as the sharing of data. So hurricanes and heavy rain are actually not new to this area. There's been documented occurrences of hurricanes causing flooding in these areas as early as 1916. So in that event back in 1916, they had 22 inches of rain that fell in 24 hours. And so this is an area that's just prone to landslides in general. So these huge hurricane events, bringing in torrential rains can be a big problem. Oh, there we go. And one of the problems is that even though knowing that this area is prone to landslides, knowing where and when these things are going to occur can be really difficult. So studying previous events can be really helpful in trying to figure out how the land will respond, which is why it was so important for state agencies and federal agencies to get involved, to kind of be able to anticipate a little bit better in the future, even if you can't fully predict. So this is a landslide hazard estimate map, and the colors here represent areas where it was expected that landslides would occur based on precipitation amounts. So this is something they put together, I don't kind of in real time, but close to when it was happening, just based on precipitation events between September 24th and September 28th. So, and then they combined this with a landslide susceptibility map to generate this kind of like heat map. So the dark colors are going to be areas that are very prone to landslides, and going away into the lighter colors, then to the yellows, are going to be areas with low susceptibility. So as of the 6th of this month, there had been almost 2,000 landslides that were identified in this area. And what they were observing so far is that these landslides tend to be clustered spatially and then separated by relatively landslide-free areas, so pretty isolated. From those almost 2,000 landslides, there are 260 that they designated as landslides of major concern, and those are ones that appear to have damaged multiple homes or pose an imminent threat to people in that area. And then of those 2,000, almost 2,000, they use a designation where they call them like flagged. And those are ones that just, not as severe as the ones of special interest, but these are ones that are impacting roads and structures and rivers and things like that. But one of the things is that because of the ecology of this area, if you've ever been to the south, there's so many trees. And so there's a chance that there could be additional landslides that could be covered by trees that are just kind of hidden underneath the tree canopy. So if you're interested in looking at these data, this is a dashboard that the USGS put together where they're monitoring things, pretty much in real time. And so you can see where landslides have been flagged and, how many total landslides there are in this area. And if you recall back to the susceptibility map where they predicted where things would happen based on precipitation and then just kind of the geology of the area, the landslides have lined up, almost exactly with that. So this is something that's being developed and will continue to develop. Because this, as I've kind of mentioned, this is an ongoing process. And so knowing this is going to help people to be better prepared in the future. And those flagged ones are the ones that are the impacts to rivers. So being able to see it here, you can see how many of these, about half of them that have been noted so far have been ones that are at least impacting like rivers and roads, if not the ones of like special concern. There's been a lot of kind of impacts from this, and the pictures are they're worth 1,000 words. It's pretty easy to kind of understate the impacts when you're just kind of viewing it through a screen, like just like hearing the news, but seeing the pictures really shows the devastation on these areas. And so many of these are kind of at disadvantaged communities as it is. And so one of the things that their USGS is really trying to push is, having people be aware of kind of what to do in these kinds of situations. So if you're in an area that is prone to landslides, or if you see a landslide in progress, some of the things to know to kind of make yourself more safe in these situations would be to, if you're able, leave the area immediately. Like if you see one happening from a distance, leave as long as it's safe to do so. These landslides can be incredibly unpredictable, and they can take out houses and cars basically instantaneously. So don't stay in, whip out your cell phone, just get out of the way. If you're in a building though, and this is occurring or you see it occurring, move up. So ideally, if you have like upper floors to your house, you want to move up. Even if you can get on top of a counter or something, it's going to be something, depending on the severity, that could potentially help save your life. Moving up and not out, I think, is the idea here, because, you don't know what's going on outside. So, and then lastly, if you see these landslide events occurring, report them to the local authorities, call, emergency services or whatnot, because if you're seeing it, that means other people are seeing it too. And that, if it's not affecting you at that moment, it might be affecting somebody else. So that's kind of the general idea there. And so we'll kind of leave it at that. We're expecting more information to come out of this, with time. It's still an ongoing, 2 months out. So we're going to transition then to talking about faults, specifically talking about creeping faults and fault geometry. And this is just kind of a recent study that's come out, and kind of an interesting one, completely different change of pace. So first off, I want to define what a creeping fault is. So a creeping fault is a fault that's going to have pretty gradual movement. And so you have this steady slipping that's going to release energy that would otherwise be kind of like backed up in this fault, or like stored in the fault, locked up. So locked faults are going to be ones where the fault is moving in a way, maybe it's getting caught up, or it's made of something really rigid, or maybe the geometry where that energy, instead of being released gradually, stores up, and then you have a rupture, a larger event. So this study kind of moves away from one of the most recent, or kind of the prevailing thought about creeping faults, is that there's this large emphasis on the rock properties and its relation to creep. So one of the big ones is serpentinite. I know I have at least 2 students in the room, so we looked at this week. But this is a very weak rock. It's very slippery. And it's known that this can also alter to the mineral talc, which is even weaker and even more slippery. And so it's been a thought for a long time that this is one of the things that's going to facilitate that kind of creeping movement, is these slippery rocks. And if we think about places like California, where we've got these transform faults, we know that these are areas where there's abundant serpentinite. So, it hasn't been a reason to question that kind of line of thinking. But this study is going to kind of look beyond that a little bit and see beyond just the rocks themselves, if there's some sort of connection to how the faults themselves kind of are laid out. And we're going to do that by looking at California. So this is just a simple location map, and there is San Francisco and Los Angeles. The red lines are to show the major fault systems, and the San Andreas Fault is labeled there. And this was an ideal place to start because of the extensive data that have been taken in California. So there's just an abundance of fault creep data that have been collected, and so that's a great place to start. And what they did is they combined this with high-resolution USGS fault databases to get kind of a better look at creep in different areas. So just to kind of get a little bit better of an idea of how these faults can kind of look in relation to each other, we're going to zoom in a little bit to Southern California here. So there we go. Fault geometry can be really, really complicated. Let me go back for a second. Fault geometry can be complicated, and Southern California is a really good example of that. So in this area, we have the San Andreas Fault, which has a big old bend in it. We have a splay off with the San Jacinto Fault, and there's also the Garlock Fault, which is going almost perpendicular to both of these faults. So it can be a really messy place. So the way that these researchers had looked at fault geometry and kind of like a way to quantify things is by using fault misalignment. So that is a parameter that looks at essentially how well do these faults line up with each other to think about complexity. And so this was a good place to do this, kind of thinking of how these faults relate to their neighborhoods. And it's a value that's expressed as a ratio. So, and this is where they brought in that fault and fold databases to do this calculation. Now, this is a screenshot of what that fault and fold database looks like. In case you're curious, I have not got the chance to zoom into this. I'm going to be looking at as many of these points as possible. If you'd like to look at maps, we'll do it together. But yeah, this is a really useful tool where you can look at just, what's known about surface deformation. So faults and folds and any sorts of estimates if they have them. Okay, so we're back to the article now, and to get you oriented here, I stared at this for a minute before I could figure out what was going on. So this is the state of California turned on its side. So you can see the lines here represent those faults that I showed in the first diagram, but everything's just rotated 90 degrees to the left. So coastline of California out here. So the white data that are shown here, the lines and everything, are from that fault and fold database. And then they overlaid their creep data on the major faults here. So this is showing the relationship between surface creep rates. So those are measured in millimeters per year. That's that dark to light, like that, those warm colors there are showing that creep rate that are those circles, so discrete points there. And then the kind of like colored region around it is the fault misalignment. So looking at creep and complexity here. And so what we see here is that the areas with the highest misalignment, so those warmer colored regions around, are also the ones that have the lowest creep rate. These are the ones that are the most complex segments. So it's the San Jacinto that's circled on the right and the Garlock Fault on the left that are circled there. And then if we look at the area that has the lightest colors, the lowest misalignment, are areas where the strands are nearly parallel. So that's going to be kind of the middle section of the San Andreas, which is where, if anybody's been to Hollister, California, and looked at offset in the town there, or have been to the Pinnacles National Park, that's where all of these are. I love the Pinnacles. Everybody should go. But also to the north, or the left on this diagram, the strands of the Hayward Fault and the Macama Fault are also almost parallel there. So a lot simpler and a lot less lower misalignment. And so the next thing they had looked at is how these things kind of go, like if we look at locked versus creeping, these are called violin plots, which you can probably see why if you've ever seen a violin. But these show, the misalignment ratio on the y-axis here, and then just locked versus creeping. And what they determined with this is that this misalignment ratio absolutely lines up with areas that they have called locked, that where you've got less creep, where things are stuck, and those are the areas where things are more complex. And then areas where things are creeping along are places where the system is a lot simpler. So they looked at a statistical model. I'm unfamiliar with it, but it's the Kolmogorov-Smirnov test that confirms that this kind of with a 99.9% confidence that the misalignment distributions for these locked and creeping faults are actually distinct. So that's pretty cool. And this is a big area to look at too. Like this is a big amount of consideration to think of this. So I mean, most of the state of California. So the kind of the overarching importance, if it isn't more clear, is that while looking at fault geometry itself isn't new, that this could be kind of a paradigm shift in how people are thinking about earthquake modeling. And so moving away from just the thinking about friction and thinking about fault materials, but considering this geometry is just going to bring another component into it. And so it's looking like it might be really helpful. So it also is something that they've begun to look at the applicability to other fault systems as well. So it's great if we can understand it for California, but regardless of what some of us Californians might think, there are other places. So we want to be able to look at this in other places too. So one of the places they looked at this, they started looking at this, they looked at the Chaman Fault in Pakistan, and they also looked at the Northern Anatolia Fault Zone in Turkey. And so I'm going to zoom in on the Northern Anatolia Fault Zone. If you're unaware, I did my master's work in Turkey, so it's close to home a little bit here, but also just a cool area in general. And what they found is that they didn't have nearly as many data points to work with here. As you can see by, it's a lot smaller area where they've got those bits there. But it's kind of an overall kind of similar kind of fault system as to the ones in California. It's those translational faults. But what they found is that they reached the same conclusions. And so these circles that are the kind of warmer colors, the lighter colors, are on areas where it's less complex. And they found that that lined up with the creep rates there. They've got much higher creep rates. Whereas the areas where you've got like these complicated splays are areas where things are getting locked up. And so not having creep, and so things getting stuck. So more research still needs to be done for this, but it looks like a pretty promising way to think about it. It's, not necessarily the be all end all. Nothing ever is, but it's a new thing that people can, if they're not already thinking about the fault geometry, there's kind of a little bit more robust of reasons why they probably should. So that's going to be it for, I had words here. So here's those things in words. Yeah, segments with simpler geometry, creep. Complex geometries, lock. So there we are. And that's going to be it for my segment today. And I encourage you to come back and check out more. I'm always open to suggestions if there's certain topics people want. But also, there's something we've been thinking about for a little while, and we're trying to kind of push it along. And so I want to turn to you all and say, hey, if you're ever listening to these conversations and you're like, hey, there's things, I just have some fun little questions. Like, I would love to know more about these people, have more of a conversation about, the human side of being geologists. That's great too. So things like you might be wondering, hey, what's your favorite national park? Or if you could be a rock, what would you want to be and why? Or what's one useless rock or mineral fact that you can share? Things like that. We're trying to figure out a way that we can set up a system if people have little questions like that, to just, be involved, even if you're like, I don't have a question on this, all sounds cool, but I want to be involved. So stay tuned. We're working on that, but keep it in mind. And for that, I'm going to be done with my presentation. And so if anybody has any questions, I would love to hear them.
Oh, that's wonderful, Alyssa. And yes, there were a few questions that came up. So one of the things, and I don't know if you ran across it and you're looking at what USGS was doing, but how well is that country covered with LiDAR? Because LiDAR imagery is our friend for looking beneath the tree canopy. So
I hadn't looked into it, but that would be a really good one to do. And my hope, since this is the USGS that's doing it, I know that a lot of what I look at here in Oregon is like at the state level. And so I think, hopefully part of that, if there's not already LiDAR there, hopefully this could be a good reason to get funding for it. Because, this area is prone to disasters and there's people who live there and those people deserve to know what's going on. So I don't know. I want to look at it, and it would, at the very least, hopefully they do have some, so they have a basis to compare things to if they're trying to argue for more LiDAR so they can look at the after effects.
I would hope so. When I worked in the Coast Range using aerial photography, we were looking at vegetation. Alder strands were our key to, hey, maybe go to the ground and check for a past landslide, because Lovely
Yeah.
little alder will come in first. And so that was our little alder eye drops we would be looking for. So next question. Have these studies and pictures, of course, helped to get more or ongoing recovery funds from government agencies?
With the landslide stuff, I mean, this is so recent. I know that, you know, having these kinds of pictures definitely helps to, I mean, they probably don't have to do as much to convince other geologists to help out. So thinking of, you know, collaborations, but I know that thinking, okay, trying to set up an interagency collaboration is just a bureaucratic nightmare in general. So I hope that, you know, being able to see this destruction in real time and seeing just how widespread it is, hopefully that's what would help them to get more funding quicker. But, you know, government also moves at a snail's pace. So as far as like moving forward, only time will tell.
And
Hopefully.
that would be geologic time.
It
All right.
really, I never thought of it that way. I think that's right.
Well, that's after 40 years with the Forest Service. So yes, it is. We are on geologic time. Okay, another question. Are there plans for these landslide prediction efforts to be implemented in tandem with evacuation systems, especially in future situations where agencies know that large rainfalls are coming? And as we know, rainfalls are a predictor of rapid shallow event landslides, but some of what they were seeing, or what I picked up in the Appalachia country, some of these are deep-seated landslides that reactivated. So it's a little bit of everything. So did you get a sense of connection yet between evacuation systems and landslide prediction?
So with the sources I was looking at, no. My thought is that the evacuation part, I'm not sure if that would be, you know, all of this was coming from the USGS. I don't know if that would be more of like a NOAA sort of a thing. You know, I'm like, I forgot what the acronym is for NOAA, but you know, the atmospheric National Agency Atmospheric Ocean something. I don't know exactly what agency would come through, but the geology ones did not tend to emphasize that. But you know, we hope if we can show, hey, if we have one of these big events, you know, we have, you know, 2 months later we've had over 2,000 landslides of varying sizes. Hopefully that will help. And the thing is with the with this, or sorry, let me pick up this one. With this, this landslide observation dashboard, you can click on things and get a little more information. And so I'm hoping they'll populate more. Some of them you can click on and it'll tell, did it impact a structure or whatnot, and what type of landslide was it? Because I mean, you know, that can be important too, is to know, because this is an area that has pretty variable geology. This is, you know, the Appalachian Mountains. Was an accretionary sort of structure at one point, and it's just kind of variable. So understanding these smaller scale things and where they've got these things occurring might be really important, and hopefully would help evacuation. But there can be such a lag between, hey, we know this is a problem, and anybody doing anything about it. So fingers crossed.
That would be true. Okay, so Paul is reminding both of us, it's the hour.
Oh my goodness.
So Alyssa, thank you as always for your insights. They're always fascinating and fun to listen to. So thank you. And I know Obinna is already off, but oh my gosh, he was excellent today.